Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Raggio. I'm a senior fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. This is Generation Jihad, the podcast that covers all things in what used to be known as the global war on terror, but we now call the Long War. Today's co-host is Joe Truzman. Joe is my friend and colleague over at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And Joe is also an editor at FDD's Long War Journal, and he's a senior research analyst at FDD, where he focuses primarily on Palestinian terror groups and Hezbollah and so much more. Joe, happy Monday. Welcome back to Generation Jihad.
Happy Monday, Bill. Glad to be here.
Yeah, always a pleasure. A little bit to talk about today, as usual. There's never a dearth of news. We have the IDF chief of staff saying that Hamas's brigade in Rafa is, well, defeated, but he's a little more nuanced than that. Thousands of Iran-backed fighters are offering to join Hezbollah in its battle against Israel. And Iran and the Taliban, they met to discuss joint action against Israel. So, Joe, let's dive into it. I'm going to read a quote. You have this up on your Twitter feed. You guys should follow Joe at Joe Truzman. Well, it's X now. It's not Twitter. I'll never get used to that. Here's what the IDF chief of staff said, quote, "We are clearly approaching the point where we can say we have dismantled the Rafa brigade, that it is defeated not in the sense that there are no more terrorists, but in the sense that it can no longer function as a fighting unit. It has suffered many casualties," end quote. So, Joe, the IDF chief of staff, what is he trying to tell us here? What's the importance of what he is saying?
Right. So, the chief of the general staff is saying that they're making progress. Okay. Now the Israeli military has been in Rafah for some weeks now. They've taken over the Philadelphia corridor, which is essentially the Egypt-Gaza border. And since then, this whole time now, I think it's been about, maybe 6 weeks or so, maybe a little less, that the Israelis have been essentially, just as the chief of staff has said, that they've essentially dismantled this brigade, right? Hamas's brigade. So, but we have to remember, of course, it's not just Hamas. There's other Palestinian terrorist groups that operate in the Gaza Strip and, of course, in Rafah. Obviously, the other one being Islamic Jihad and quite a few others, actually. But nevertheless, this is good news. However, I'll say a couple things, just a couple of my thoughts. A couple of days ago, there was reports in Israeli media that the IDF targeted. He could be considered number 4 or number 5 as far as the list is concerned. As far as the list that the IDF has of top Hamas members, right? So this is number 4, number 5. Now, his name is Ra'ad Saad, and he is a Hamas commander, right? He's up there, and they targeted him. I think it was in the central Gaza Strip, if I remember correctly. Targeted him a few days ago. We don't know what happened. We don't know if they were successful. The interesting thing is, earlier this year, actually, I think it was in March, the IDF published some information that they had arrested a bunch of terrorists in the Gaza Strip. I think it was at Shifa Hospital. And they published these pictures of these terrorists, right? Like, a profile of them. And one of those terrorists was Ra'ad Saad, right? So, obviously, they didn't catch him, right? So I think I think I read that they had published that in error. So anyway, point being is that I just take some caution in what the IDF is saying, right? Obviously, they're saying, yeah, we may have hit him, but they're not saying, right? They're not saying if they were successful. So we don't know, but it would be a big loss. That if they hit Ra'ad Saad, that would be significant. But we'll see what happens. But yeah, overall, things appear to be going well for the IDF in Rafah, especially after the comments made by the chief of the general staff. But I think, the way I see it, Bill, unless you get guys that like Sinwar and Dave and a few others, I think Hamas still survives, as a military force in the Gaza Strip. And I know they're not saying that, that there's not going to be any more terrorists, that they've killed all the terrorists, but still, I think those are the most important people that they need to get, those targets. They still have been able to, right? Like 8 months into it. So, again, good news, but at the same time, the war is obviously not over.
Yeah, not just the high value targets, but the hostages as well,
Of
right?
course,
So
yeah.
Hamas, is the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and all the other groups, they have enough capacity to hold these hostages, to keep them concealed from the prying eyes of Israeli intelligence and the Israeli military. I look at what the chief of general staff said here. I think what he's trying to say is Hamas, look, they can't fight as an organized unit, right? On the streets, they can't organize and set up complex ambushes and things of that nature. On a large scale. He's probably right there, but I'm not sure I would have used the term defeated, because that's going to be taken out of context by people who aren't paying as much attention to this. And also, I would also say, when was the last time we saw Hamas fighting or functioning as a fighting unit, as he had said? Um, we haven't seen a lot of that. We've seen a lot of, small ambushes, fighting from buildings, planning an IED, just very, very, I'd hesitate to even call them small unit tactics, because they haven't been fighting as a unit in Gaza that I could tell for quite some time. Perhaps some, isolated circumstances, but over the last several months. Now, this what he may be indicating as well, right? This is so it's a bit to unpack there, but I certainly think it's worth looking at. He's probably right. They've probably suffered many casualties, but your point stands, Joe. If they aren't fully defeated, if you don't take out those top key leaders, and not just the leaders, the people getting money, the weapons smugglers, the IED, the bomb makers, the bomb, the guys who were, getting the weapons and maintaining all of the people behind the scenes that that make Palestinian Islamic Jihad function, then there's a good chance that these groups can reconstitute itself, and that will not be a defeat for Hamas.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I completely agree. 100%. Then that's the issue. So that's why I don't know. I don't want to sound like I'm being pessimistic here. Maybe I am, but until we see those top guys removed out of the picture, and then more time to locate and identify and destroy tunnels, obviously locate hostages. I just don't think the Israeli military, or rather Hamas, is militarily defeated, right? Or at least their ability to wage, a counterinsurgency or whatever. I don't think that. I think they will be able to reconstitute, or be able to come back again as a fighting force, given enough time. The good thing, of course, too, here is that, and I sort of mentioned it earlier, is that Israel has control of the Rafa, of the border area between Egypt and Gaza. So, and I've heard this word before used by the Israelis, suffocating the Hamas's lifeline, basically their smuggling routes, right, for weapons, and I keep thinking about this, Bill, especially when it comes to Sinwar and others, that these smuggling, it would not surprise me at all if Sinwar is not even in Gaza.
I agree, Joe.
I wish people would talk
we're in
more
8 months now.
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me as well if there's still, even though the Israelis have control of that border area between Egypt, the northern Sinai, and Gaza, it wouldn't surprise me if there's still tunnels that they don't know about, right? So even after controlling the area, so I just, and that's a big problem, right? If Sinwar is not even in Gaza, so yeah, so that's why I guess, like I was saying before, I'm a bit pessimistic about things. So
It's not just it's that, Joe. Like, and I know I'm going to speak for you here, because it's Israeli hesitation, the failure to shut that border down at the onset, delaying the Rafa operation for how many, 5 months. We've just seen a lot of hesitation and delay that's given Hamas the ability to to ride this wave, so to speak. And that's what's troubling, right? I don't think it's a matter of capabilities, and you anticipated a question, about the border, right? Look, first of all, it was me. I'd get the excavators out. I'd dig about a 300, however deep I could dig a trench from the Mediterranean to the far corner of the border to Egypt, to Israel, Egypt, and Gaza. And I'd fill the damn thing up with water and say, go ahead and build a tunnel through this.
Right.
And, moats should become a thing. But Israel's been occupying that corridor, the Philadelphia corridor, for well over a month now.
Yeah.
This is, as you noted, key smuggling route. Egypt was very upset about this when it first happened, but we're not hearing much about that today, right, Joe?
Right. Yeah.
And so, is Israel going to be able to occupy this border indefinitely? Will Egypt accept this?
See, that's the thing. That's another thing. We've talked about this before, Bill, where and people have heard a lot about it in the news. So what's the day after plan? And we don't really. There isn't, at least that the Israelis have publicly, demonstrated or showed anybody that, well, what's their plan exactly, right? And I think a lot of people, especially even Israeli officials, have questioned Netanyahu and his advisors' plans on this. Well, what are they, right? Because something has to be done, right? Is Gaza going to become militarily occupied? Occupied rather by the Israeli military? I don't know, right? They just can't leave it like that, right? These groups will just come right back. So there's a lot of questions, but this is something I swear to you, we've talked about this since the beginning. Started doing the podcast. I think it's back in October, November when we started really focusing on Gaza. That this was the big question we brought up. What's going to happen, right? What are the Israelis going to do with Gaza? So, and it's still a problem. Almost, we're 8.5 months in now, right? So we'll see. I don't know. A lot of questions, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's just unacceptable at this point that there is no vision has been articulated by the Israeli government as to what do they, even if it's vague.
Right.
We really haven't gotten that. We're in Gaza. We have to fight Hezbollah. Like, you have to be thinking ahead, and it's difficult for a country like Israel because it has limited resources, limited manpower. Country of about 10 million people. It has to import weapons, and it creates its own, but it can't create in the volume that it needs to fight multi-front wars.
Right.
Yeah, it's just, I get that this is hard, but it's, where you said we're 8.5 months into this. There have to be an answer at some point, at least a vague vision.
Something. Yeah. And, I know I can say that I think that there have been plans to try to figure out what the day after would look like, just from conversations that I've had with Israeli officials over the last 8 months. Right, I think there have been plans. There are plans that they've talked about it at least. Okay, so but something official, right? Something that they say, okay, well, this is, even if it's vague, like you're saying, this is our thoughts. This is what we plan to do. At least put it out there publicly, right? So, and I haven't seen anything like that. So I don't know.
Maybe they have a plan. Maybe we're just in the dark about it. But my guess is there isn't, given that they're, given that what we've been seeing in the press, given the fact that Israeli officials, right, are upset about this.
Yeah,
the fact of a lack of vision. Something has to change. It's really hard for the Israelis to move forward if they don't have a vision for what's to happen next. What's to happen in Gaza next? How do we handle Hezbollah?
Right, and that was the thing with one of the cabinet ministers. I think he resigned just recently. Benny Gantz. He was a member of this, of the War Council, obviously before he quit. But he wanted Netanyahu to publish to publish this day after plan, right? And it never happened, right? So Benny Gantz ended up quitting. So this coalition. But anyway, yeah, I think by now got to be something, and I just don't know the reason why. I couldn't say. And just like you brought up, maybe they just don't. There isn't one, right? Or they just haven't. They're trying to formulate one, and it's just not ready. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. But yeah, I think by now there needs to be something, right? To at least because there's genuine concern, right? What are you going to do here? Look at this, 8 month, 8.5 month war now.
How
What are you
are
going to do?
Israeli reservists and their families, or the people in the north, supposed to plan, or the people living close to the border of Gaza supposed to plan for their future if they don't really understand? Hey, we're going to be, in the north, we're going to have to fight Hezbollah, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's another problem
Um,
we can talk about. But yeah, no, absolutely.
and people need to see. I saw a report, that the reservists are getting called up second and third time, and there's a lot of all of these problems with Israelis. Most of their military is reservist. Um, yeah, I just they need to have a vision and they need to communicate it with their people because what's happening now, it's going to create distrust as time goes on too. I
That's
think
what
it's
it's
already
doing.
happening.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right, Bill. Bill, distrust. That's the problem. And the longer you wait, the worse it's going to get. And I'm sure the Israeli government knows this, but for whatever reason, they haven't published anything solid yet. So yeah, and I can't say why again.
Yeah, no, well, it certainly bears watching. So Joe, let's discuss. There's a report out there, thousands of fighters, militias, related to Iranian proxies. They offered to join Hezbollah if it goes to war with Israel.
Yes.
Now, look, I've long called these, particularly the Iraqi and Syrian militias, where there's tens of hundreds of thousands of fighters. It's a strategic manpower reserve for Iran. What was Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah's response to this?
Well, I think it came out after he well, I'll tell you this. So over the weekend, he had a speech, and essentially what he said was that Hezbollah has, I think he said approximately 100,000, or he has 100,000 fighters, right? So Hezbollah doesn't need help. That's what he said. And then this report came out after what he said. So, uh, but big but here, even though Nasrallah said this, that Hezbollah doesn't need help because it has sufficient manpower, has everything it needs in case of an outbreak of or an expansion of the current war that's already happening in the north. There's still, I mean, we've talked about this, Bill, several times. There's still foreign fighters coming into Lebanon, right, to fight Israel. Now, I think it's at a it's at a minimum, right? There's not a lot, but there's Syrians coming in, belonging to. I mentioned this before, Imam Hussein Brigade, which is a Syrian militia established by the RGC. The Israelis bombed one of their vehicles that had with the occupants inside the vehicle had fired rockets at Israel from southern Lebanon. So and then we have again Syrians belonging to Palestinian factions, and then we have Turks belonging to Hamas that were killed in southern Lebanon. So there's already some foreign fighters there. We don't know the extent of it. I suspect that there's members of the Islamic resistance in Iraq fighting in Lebanon. It would not surprise me at all, especially with the claims of drones being fired at Haifa in northern Israel and other targets by the Islamic resistance in Iraq. It just doesn't make sense to me that they would fire it from Iraq or Syria. Lebanon would be a much easier place. Nevertheless, so there's already foreign fighters coming in, these militias coming in into Lebanon. But I think if there's again an expansion of war, right? If the war expands, the Israelis start really hitting Hezbollah hard. I think this influx of foreign fighters will be much bigger, right? It could be it could be a threat, really, or a warning. Will they actually go ahead with it? I'm not sure. I think Hezbollah at the beginning, I don't think Hezbollah will need help from other militias. I think we'll see a continuation of what we've seen already, where especially Iraqi militias or the Houthis are firing drones, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles at Israel. We'll see an increase in that, I suspect. But if a war drags on, and Hezbollah is really getting hit hard, I could see these militias being activated or increasing their firepower or their against Israel, right, by sending fighters into southern Lebanon, which they can easily do by crossing from Syria into Lebanon. So it's definitely a problem. But all of this just goes back to Iran. You know, all of this from October 8th, as far as actually October 7th, rather, and October 8th. This all goes back to Iran, I think. And I think Iran is the one really pushing the buttons here at the end of the day. So I don't know. I've always thought the one thing, I keep thinking, okay, well, Israel can hit at the proxies, right, at these militias, but are they hitting the wrong target here? Shouldn't they just go after Iran, right? Because they're the ones controlling.
Yeah, look, this is an issue. I mean, to me, the Israelis, if they want to make, they're not going to make the Iranians pay by making their proxies pay.
Exactly.
But there's so much pressure on the Israelis. Just look at what happened after Iran attacked Israel.
Right. Yep.
And, the pressure for Israel to conduct a limited response, that deterrence mode has long gone for the Israelis. It's going to be difficult to reestablish. I agree with you, Joe. Well, first of all, the anonymous militia leaders in Iraq weighed in and saying, yep, we're all in. We'd love to do this. We have to keep in mind during the Syrian civil war and up to this day that Iraqi militias, they're probably, in my estimation, the more sophisticated ones, fought against the U.S. and Western forces, continue to target U.S. forces in Iraq, and their close proximity to Iran, gives them a lot of access to the training and to the support that the IRGC gives. But in Syria, the Iraqi militias just basically cleaved off sections of themselves, renamed them, and had them fight in Syria. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw this happening, think something like that, or just have them come in piecemeal and fill in where needed. But there is these groups, people downplay their abilities, but they wield a lot of strength in Iraq and in Syria, and they have capabilities. And, look, these militias are responsible for killing hundreds of American troops, thousands of Iraqi soldiers and police, and tens of thousands of Iraqi civilians during the war in Iraq. And these groups were at the forefront of helping drive the Islamic State out of the control of the cities in Iraq and in Syria. So they have experience, they have capabilities. They shouldn't be dismissed.
No, definitely shouldn't be dismissed. I would definitely be concerned about that. But these groups joining in, I'm just trying to figure out that, this whole issue, I did this thing a while back ago, this mapping, this visual where I showed all the groups that were backed by Iran that were on Israel's borders, right? I did it from Gaza, Lebanon, West Bank, Syria, and included Iraqi militias because obviously they operate in Syria. So yeah, it's quite formidable, right? We're talking more than a dozen groups here, and yeah, it's just very interesting. I don't know what's going to happen with Hezbollah, but listen, at the end of the day, something that's very important here that I just trying to foot stomp because I think we kind of lost it with Hamas. That Hezbollah started the fighting on October 8th. Okay. They started this, right? And to an extent, Iran, right? And they understood, Hezbollah understood, Iran understood that by doing so, by initiating attacks on Israel on October 8th, that war was very possible. Okay. It didn't happen on that day. It didn't. The Israelis were, if you read the reports and if you believe them, that Netanyahu decided against an all-out attack on Hezbollah after October 8th, right? They stood down. But it seems like it may happen now, right? So, but nevertheless, these groups, Hezbollah and others in Iran, they started this conflict, at least in the north, knowing full well that what they were getting into and what can happen, right? So, and they have and I think they're ready for it. I guess that's my point here. They're ready for it, and I don't think I haven't seen hesitation, right? So, but I'm not so sure with the Israelis that there's hesitation because obviously there's this huge operation in Gaza and they're getting hit from everywhere. and now trying to start a war with Hezbollah, right? Not start a war, but I should say react in a broader scope, in a broader manner compared to what they've been doing the last 8 months. Israel, obviously Israel doesn't want to do it, but I don't think they have a choice here, right?
No, they absolutely don't have a choice. I mean, there's just no way. We've discussed this a million times, right, Joe? One of Hezbollah's attacks that occurs at this moment in time, right, or during this time period since October 7th, would have led to an overwhelming Israeli response. And now we're seeing multiple Hezbollah attacks a day, and Israel is just in a one. I know people say, oh, it's not tit for tat. The Israelis are hitting Hezbollah hard. They are, but it wouldn't be tolerated in this manner before October 7th, and it's something that isn't sustainable for the Israelis in the long term. There's what I've heard, anywhere from 60 to 100,000 Israelis have left their homes in northern Israel. That's just, they can't do this forever. It's just not possible.
Yeah, and there's internal pressure. It's by those people that were displaced, right?
Yep. They have families. They're living with, obviously they're going to be living with other family elsewhere. It's a lot of pressure. It's, again, Israel's a country of, about 10 million people. You have, a significant percentage of the population that's affected. And again, it's not just northern Israel as well. They're still haven't gotten back to normalcy or in the areas around Gaza.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's slowly getting back, but yes, it's still definitely not like it was before. Yeah, but you're right. I met somebody, it was a couple months ago, and this person lives in northern Israel, and he's telling me, hey, I haven't been back to my home in months, right, because of the war, right, and because he lives near the northern border with Lebanon. So yeah, it's real. It's definitely real. And people, 38.5 months, citizens, the residents of northern Israel can only take so much of this. So because what are you going to do? Like, either you're going to push Hezbollah back, right? And we've heard things like, oh, Israel wants to push them back to the Litani River. I'm not sure if that's going to make a ton of difference, but nevertheless, the people can't go back to the reality before October 7th or before October 8th, especially those at the northern border.
I talked to David Daoud, our colleague at FDD, about that earlier today on John Batchelor's radio show, and he had said pushing back to the Litani will help with the short-ranged rockets that Hezbollah is firing, which would overwhelm Iron Dome and the air defenses, and then Israel would have to worry about the mid to long range rockets, which obviously the bulk of Hezbollah's arsenal is going to be the short range, right? Mortars and everything from that level to small missiles, right? I don't pretend to be an expert on Hamas's arsenal, but they have a range of weapons that again would probably start with RPGs and mortars, things that are going anywhere from half a mile to a couple miles. So if we push them back anywhere from, let's say, 15 to 25 miles, which is about the Litani, that should reduce that short range stuff and make it more defensible. So, and again, it's not a complete solution, but it would give the Israelis the ability to hunt those longer range weapon systems if they felt they could get away with that. So
sure. I think the one point to add, the short range stuff, I know what's really been plaguing the Israelis are the guided missile strikes against the areas in northern Israel, against communities and military targets.
When you say guided missiles, you're referring to like optical guided,
or like anti-tank type.
Yes.
And I think there was some other interesting ones. There was obviously there's. I mean, I don't think you can do much about the drones, but Hezbollah drones. But there was this.
Pushing them back, Joe, with the drones, right? Pushing them back would take out some of the shorter range drones too, as well, right?
Sure. It's possible.
I mean, space does work. It's not the complete solution, but it's a partial solution that can reduce I think a meaningful portion of Hezbollah's arsenal. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. You're right. Absolutely. But right now, at the end of the day, what we've seen, what we've witnessed and observed over the last 8 months, that as far as Hezbollah's firepower is nothing really. And that's the scary part. That's the very concerning part. That's why we
Yeah,
haven't seen a war. All
yeah,
right. That's why the Israelis have waited so long. I mean, what they have, folks, it's really bad. And as far as for the bad for the Israelis, what can happen to them? Um, this is not Hamas. This isn't all a dozen Palestinian groups firing rockets at Israel. This is something much worse. So yeah, and there's been a lot of threats by Hezbollah and a lot of publications threatening, oh, we'll target your infrastructure and vital infrastructure and sensitive sites in Israel. But at the end of the day, Hezbollah, Iran, whoever in the region cannot stop the Israeli Air Force, and they whatever happens as far as what Hezbollah does to Israel, it'll be so much worse for Hezbollah and the Lebanese citizens. And it's totally not worth it.
yeah. Those are the Lebanese citizens. They'll be the ones caught in the cross, and the Israeli citizens will be the ones caught in the crossfire of Hezbollah. This is a war that Hezbollah is bringing upon Lebanon. Yeah, it's a difficult choice for Israel. Like, this war is coming. The Israelis would be well served to fire the opening salvo. Yes, they're fighting right now, but well served to just take the initiative and wipe out these systems as they can. It's just a matter of time. So, Joe, the last subject, the Iran's foreign minister and the Taliban's foreign minister of their not recognized by the world Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. They met and to discuss, quote, joint action, end quote, against Israel. Look, the way I look at this, difficult for the Taliban have their own problems, but the Taliban are looking to look. This is, to me, with the Taliban. We were told by people, our betters, so-called betters in the foreign policy world, that the Taliban only cared about what's happening in Afghanistan. It's a local actor. It's not an international actor. And meanwhile, we've seen numerous statements of the Taliban genuflecting to the Palestinians, and here you
Mm-hmm.
have a case them getting with the Iranians to try to figure out how can they contribute to the fight. What's your take on this, Joe? Is this aspirational, or is this to me, it's just the Iranians trying to increase the size and strength of its axis of resistance.
Right. I mean, we wrote about this before October 7th, Bill. You and I wrote about Hamas, meeting with Taliban
Yeah,
leader. I think it was in Doha.
it was.
And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so that relationship was there already. Okay. But I'm not sure. And actually, I think you would know the answer, this answer better than I, Bill. But I don't. I mean, even though maybe there may be a common cause between the Taliban and Hamas, and maybe other members of the so-called Axis of Resistance, led by Iran. Um, I just don't. I'm not sure the Taliban would do much in support, right? Of maybe symbolic support, but other than in this war, right? I don't think they would join. Maybe they're saying all this just to shore up support for their cause, or I think this is more symbolic more than anything. I mean, I just don't see it. But again, I defer to you. You know the Taliban much more than I, Bill. But it's a little. I found it a little strange. I think it was just more. I think right now the war is a big deal, right? So they put out these statements and they talk about stuff about like that. Oh yeah, we'll support the Palestinians and stuff like that. But in the end of the day, are they going to? I would be surprised. But again, I think you would know better than I, Bill, about the Taliban.
Yeah, I think it would be, first of all, I think it would be difficult for the Taliban to do, but not out of the realm of possibility. It's probably a language barrier, just that in itself. Taliban certainly has their fighters are battle hardened. They have capability to fight, and I'm sure there is no um, dearth of Taliban jihadists who would love to kill an Israeli. So I lean towards this is probably more of a propaganda stunt to bolster Iran, to put a unified front for the Islamic world against the U.S. and Israel and the West.
Like an Islamic front, sort of speak.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
And the Taliban certainly, it's difficult for them to get involved in that sphere, and it's been more verbal support. But the Taliban achieved a great victory. Let's face it, they ousted the U.S. and the West and defeated the Afghan government. And I think that provides a little bit of gravitas to
Sure.
to the other side as well, right?
Yeah.
They're all starting to look like winners now. Now, I also don't discount now for those who say that, oh, well, this is clearly the Taliban and Iran could never work together. I testified in a case called Cabrera v. Iran in, geez, that was October 2021 now, or 21. Yeah. God, time is going by. And we won. We proved that Iran was providing safe haven, money, training, weapons, intelligence to the Taliban. And they did it because they wanted to defeat Iran did it because it wanted to defeat the U.S. and the Taliban was the best bet, really their only bet in Afghanistan. And so there is a relationship here. So them talking about this, while I sit there and say, is this likely? I don't know, but could it happen? Yeah, it could. I don't dismiss anything that the Taliban say when it comes to this. When I was reporting on in the probably somewhere beginning around 2013, 14, the Taliban started really picking up its propaganda on its training camps, right? And I would, report on what the camps look like, what provinces they claimed they were in, what the units were called. And people were like, oh, that's Mickey Mouse training. That's just propaganda. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm seeing some of this translate onto the battlefield, but whatever. And lo and behold, then the Taliban started advertising their special forces and whatnot. And then we have the collapse of Afghanistan, right? Well, those training camps were put into place by the Taliban to look, were they going to defeat us with them? No, but they did enough to make us want to disengage. And the real enemy was the Afghan government. So long story short here is when the Taliban says something like this, I just don't discount it out of hand. I can't dismiss it because these groups, this group has a lot of credit. It, frankly, is very credible when it says something. It attempts to do it. It didn't lie about about creating units and its strategy to take over Afghanistan. Why should I think it's lying about wanting to get involved in the conflict here? What could it do? I mean, could it send fighters to Gaza? Absolutely not. Could it send some bomb makers and some trainers into Iraq and into Syria, possibly into Lebanon to fight alongside? That's possible. I can't dismiss it out of hand.
No, you raise excellent points, Bill. I just wonder at when that would happen. I just don't think. I think Hezbollah, when Nasrallah says that they can fight on their own, Hezbollah can fight on their own against Israel. I think that's true. I think he's being he believes that.
Yeah.
But I wonder at one point where Iran would say, okay, Hezbollah needs help here, or they would just right off the bat just start these militias in the region start coming in right away, because I mean this is a big opportunity. We have to remember for years militias have been threatening the Taliban, or not the Taliban, but I'm just talking about kind of a little bit of a different subject here. Militias have been talking about attacking Israel. Right now is the perfect opportunity, and we were seeing some of that. But a war with Hezbollah, I think things would change. Certainly would change, but I just don't know when the Taliban would join in. If they would, who knows?
Yeah. Exactly. Look, if Hezbollah starts taking significant casualties, if it wants to fight to hold the ground south of the Litani, it's probably going to need reinforcements. Hezbollah's going to take casualties from the Israeli Air Force. And that could be, Nasrallah could, look, I think in the article I read, it was at the Associated Press, Nasrallah had indicated that he would take assistance. This was years ago. So I think what Nasrallah is probably saying right now is, look, now we're good. We're good now. We're okay. We got enough fighters. We got enough equipment, whatever. But I don't think that it discounts him from saying in the future, hey, maybe we could use that help. Because you got to admit, like this article, there's a propaganda aspect to it as well. Nasrallah is saying, we're fine, we're strong, we're good, we don't need help, we're good. But if he needs it, he'll ask for it at some point. And then
Oh,
that's when you could see the Iraqi militias and the Syrian militias and, and possibly, there's obviously Shia Afghan and Pakistani militias, there's Bahraini militias. You've reported on these, done great job reporting on these in the past, Joe. They could start filtering fighters, into Lebanon if Hezbollah does indeed need them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I'm more concerned about. I think, again, like I said before, I think that you'll see more cruise missiles, drones fired by these militias at Israel if there's a war with Hezbollah. But the influx of foreign fighters into Lebanon, that's what interests me. Will we see that?
Yeah, will it be piecemeal, like a couple here, a couple there? Or are we going to see units hit the battlefield?
Exactly.
That's what's interesting.
Yes, that's when we know for sure there's this a concerted effort or a concerted campaign to bring in foreign fighters. Because that's what we're seeing right now, here and there. Like I said before, Syrians, Turks, whatever.
But we're not at a point where the intensity of the fighting requires more than that. And that's probably what Nasrallah is indicating right now.
Yeah. No, it's a very good point. So I think that's where we're at. So hopefully it won't get to that, but things look so bad in the north right now. It's I don't know. I wish I could say one way or the other how it's going to happen, if anything is going to happen. But like you said earlier, I think there would be, if something happens, there's going to be, I think the Israelis will hit Hezbollah first. With a raid across Lebanon, and I think it will start like that. I've heard some other reports that differ a little as far as the strategy of what Israel will do, but nevertheless, I think Israel will initiate this expansion of war that Hezbollah started. So we'll see. It's going to be an interesting summer, that's for sure.
Yeah, it sure will, Joe. That's a great point. This is kind of what I've been waiting for. What we just talked about here is, do these militias, weigh in en masse? Do they enter the battlefield, not as individual fighters filling gaps or serving as trainers? I have no doubt that that's probably trainers, advisors, whatever. Maybe some weapons expertise or something like that. But do we see platoons and companies of these units showing up on the battlefield and fighting as one? If this war between Israel and Hezbollah kicks off, we're going to find out that answer, I think, pretty soon.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for it, but I would suspect it would happen. I'll say that.
Yeah, I suspect we'll see small units of the militias, at the very least, entering the battlefield at some point. They did this in Syria. Why wouldn't they do it here, particularly if it's needed? Well, look, Joe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. It's always a pleasure. And we'll talk more next week. We'll see where we're at.
Absolutely, Joe. Always a pleasure to speak with you. And thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode of Generation Jihad. Just a reminder, you can listen to us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe to Generation Jihad and leave us a review, preferably a positive one, but only if we earned it. Thanks again, and we'll see you all again real soon.